Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Fleeting Thoughts podcast. I am Joe. In this episode, we're going to be reading day 6 of my short story collection, 30 Days of Fiction. Right now, if you sign up for email updates, I'm giving away the entire 30 Days of Fiction short story collection for free. Go to joesnotesblog.com/subscribe to sign up. Hello, I will be reading day 6 of the 30 Days of Fiction short story collection written by Joe Gray. A black fedora skidded along the concrete street heading the opposite direction of its owner, who was now stoically walking against the roaring wind, heading toward a wooden door attached to a large home in an affluent suburban neighborhood. The lawn was immaculately manicured, the window shades were shut, and the wind chimes were clanging uncontrollably. Her long black hair matched the long black trench coat in its desire to join the hat, but their owner held them in place as best she could. She knocked on the door, and after a few minutes was greeted by a tall blonde woman in her early 20s. She had French tips for fingernails, perfect makeup, a pearl necklace adorned her clavicle, and her long black dress had a deep V-cut, revealing much.
Hello?
The blonde woman said in an airy, uninterested tone.
Who are you?
I'm Detective Kelly Hirsch, the woman with black hair said with a smile. I assume you're Karen Studdles, Kelly said to an uninterested Mrs. Studdles.
Yes?
The model-esque blonde responded, looking back into the home as if Kelly wasn't there. Good, oh that's good. I need to ask you a few questions. Can I come inside? Kelly asked, indicating the wind as a good reason to comply.
Sure, whatever.
Karen said, standing aside.
I'm not doing anything anyway.
Well, you're dressed very well for someone not doing anything, Karen said while sitting down on the plush leather couch that sat in the middle of the expansive living room.
I always look like this?
Karen retorted with a wry smile. Kelly noted a bit of disdain in her voice.
What is this all about?
I'm investigating the disappearance of Jeremiah Hoffman, Kelly said, looking for any recognition in the young woman's face. She didn't find any.
Karen
said with feigned interest. I understand you were seeing each other? Kelly asked as Karen started pacing around the room.
Yes? But how do you know?
Karen said, much more interested now than when the detective had first arrived. We found your number on its phone under the name Baby K, so I assumed you were lovers. Don't worry, I'm not here to upset your marriage. I don't really care about that. I just want to know when you saw Jeremiah last.
Oh, well, thank you for that. We stopped seeing each other about a week ago.
Karen said, sitting down on a second couch now facing Kelly.
He just stopped calling and I didn't think much of it. Our relationship wasn't really that serious, so I just let it go.
All right. Well, if you hear from him or think of anything that will help us find out what happened, please give me a call, Kelly said as she stood up and handed Karen her business card.
That's it?
Karen asked, surprised the conversation was over. Oh yeah, that's it. We're done, Kelly responded and then walked to the door.
All right. Well, I hope everything is okay with Jeremiah and thanks for being discreet,
Karen said as she walked Kelly to the door. Kelly walked out into the windy world. The door slammed behind her. Karen watched out the window as Kelly drove by and waited a few minutes before leaving, not knowing that Kelly had parked down the road and was watching as Karen drove away in her not doing anything clothes. Kelly followed Karen's blue Jetta in a few miles until it stopped at a run-down apartment complex. Kelly noted an old tan VW Bug parked out front and assumed it was a tenant's. She watched as Karen ran up the stairs, and at the door she was greeted by a young man who picked her up and carried her into the apartment. Kelly waited another 20 minutes until the two young lovers exited the apartment and headed down the stairs. He now matched her in a sharp black suit and polished leather shoes. Following Karen's Jetta again, Kelly found that their end goal was the newly opened nightclub Hellhole. As Kelly watched the two enter the club and was about to leave, she noticed the same tan VW Bug from the apartment complex parked across from her. As she drove by it, she looked inside to see an older man dressed better than the car deserved, glaring into the club. She took note of the man and the car's license plate. The next morning, Kelly walked into the precinct with a coffee in her hand.
Where's your hat?
Johnny asked from behind the desk. That fucking Wayne took it, Kelly answered with a smile. At her desk, she began to look through files, discarding papers this way and that until she stopped on a photo. The photo was taken from Facebook and featured Karen Stuttles and her grey-haired new husband, Gary Stuttles. The man's face looked familiar, and after a minute, Kelly realised it was the man from the VW Bug. She frantically looked for her notes and found the license plate number she had scribbled down. She tracked the registration to the name Garfield Starling, but no one by that name existed in any other database. Kelly grabbed her coat and made her way to the door. She had some questions to ask Gary Stuttles. Gary worked in the top floor of the tallest building in town, which wasn't saying much at 10 floors high, but obviously he was a somebody. Kelly exited the elevator and asked the receptionist if she could speak to Gary, but he was in a meeting and she would have to wait. After 30 minutes, Gary entered from a nearby glass door along with another man, one in navy blue and the other in all white. Kelly stood up.
You must be Kelly.
The man in the white suit said, shaking Kelly's hand. Yes, you must be Gary Stuttles. I was hoping to ask you about a missing VW Bug, she said, looking into the man's eyes. Noticing the intensity of the conversation thus far, the man in blue walked away without a word.
That's a weird question,
he said with one eyebrow raised. I can see why you would think that, but the Bug is registered under the name Garfield Starling. Do you know anyone by that name? She asked, looking down at the note with the license plate number on it. He was staring down at the note too when he said,
Nope. Doesn't sound familiar. Why?
Yeah, well, I asked because, well, that name doesn't exist in any database. The money used to buy the car was traced back to a corporate credit card that your company owns, Kelly said, looking up to find Gary pacing back and forth in front of her.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to look into it,
Gary said, and then he stopped and looked at Kelly with a concerned look.
You said this was about a missing car. Why would you be investigating that?
Yes. Actually, I think it's important for a missing persons case I'm working on, she responded. Kelly put her items against her side and reached out to shake Gary's hand. He took her hand and stared into her eyes.
Thanks for talking to me. I'll let you know what I find out about that bug,
Gary said, squeezing Kelly's hand until it started to turn white. You're hurting my hand, Mr. Stuttles, Kelly remarked.
Oh shit, sorry about that,
Gary said, letting go and shaking his head as if being lifted from a haze. Kelly left the building and waited in her car, looking through files, making calls and drinking coffee. An hour later, she watched as Gary left the building, jumped into a yellowed Chevy Charger and drove off. She followed him through the city, over a bridge and down a historic highway road winding through tall green trees. Miles later, he finally stopped at a small farmhouse where a garage door opened before him. Driving past, Kelly saw the yellow Charger entering the garage, and as the door was sliding closed, she saw a glimpse of a tan VW Bug. She drove up a ways, turned around and slowly crept back toward the farmhouse. As the house came into view, she saw the tail end of the tan VW Bug heading back toward the city, and she had to choose quickly. Investigate the house or follow the man? She chose to follow the man and called in to have the house investigated, although with no warrant it might not provide any additional evidence. She followed Gary much more cautiously as to not be found out, but she was practiced at such things, so he never noticed as she trailed behind him. Kelly was less than surprised, driving through recognizable streets, to find that she was back at the apartment where she had seen Karen meet her sexual confidant. She stopped her car on the curb a good distance away and watched as Gary, now dressed in shabby jeans and a black coat, strolled up the stairs and knocked on the door. When the door opened, he disappeared inside and the door slammed. A few moments later, Gary was holding the now unconscious man over his shoulder and heading back down the stairs. "We've got a possible 209 in progress," Kelly called over the radio. "Pursuing at distance. I think I know where they're heading." She followed long enough to confirm her suspicion and dialed her cell phone. "Are you guys still at the farmhouse I called in earlier?" Kelly asked.
"Yeah, didn't see much, so we're going to leave."
The voice of the patrol officer responded from the other side. "No, I need you to drive up the road a distance, park, and get ready to meet me at the house. I'm following the suspect there with a potential victim. I'll let you know when I'm close." Kelly spoke fast and clearly. She dropped the phone on the seat next to her and continued her pursuit, making sure not to let her adrenaline affect the heaviness of her foot. Gary arrived at the garage and disappeared behind its door as Kelly parked in the driveway, partially blocking any retreat by way of car. She made a phone call and a few minutes later was greeted by 2 uniformed officers. One officer had a shotgun, while the detective and the other officer had only pistols. As they neared the house, they heard a muted but distinguishable scream coming from within. "Take the back," Kelly said, gesturing to the officer with the shotgun, who then quickly started moving around back. Kelly and the other officer started for the door. Kelly tried the door handle but found it was locked, so she used the handle of her pistol to break the small window above the handle, allowing her to reach in between the glass shards and unlock the door. She opened it quickly and they both entered the dark room. Kelly gestured for the officer to follow her, and they both made their way down the dark, dusty hallway until they reached a hanging string attached to an attic door. Looking at the officer knowingly, she pulled the string down swiftly, stepping aside as it made a loud crash toward the floor. 2 gunshots rang out and 2 holes erupted at Kelly's feet. She shot back, knowing it would be no use, but then heard a struggle, then glass breaking, and finally a blast from the shotgun out back. "Stay here and don't get shot," Kelly remarked to the officer, who looked stunned, before she ran out the back door. She opened the door to find Gary splayed out in the tall grass on his back, bleeding from the chest. The officer with the shotgun was breathing heavily, calling in the incident on his lapel radio. Kelly and the officer exchanged worried glances, and then Kelly turned around and went back through the door to meet the officer at the bottom of the attic stairs.
What the fuck?"
The officer said, looking at Kelly, and then back up at the hole in the ceiling. "The suspect jumped out the window up there, pulled on Justin, and Justin shot him in the chest," she responded. "Let's go see what horror lies up there," she said, pointing upward with her pistol. The officer led the way, and as they made their way up the stairs, the smell of putrefying flesh made them cringe. Looking around the room, they both saw the bodies. One tied up to the rafters, hanging by the arms, with flesh from the neck to the chest flayed open and the head slumped down. Another body lay in pieces in 2 plastic bins. One bin with the body and legs, the other containing the head and arms. Kelly assumed this was the missing Jeremiah Hoffman, but there was no way to know just from the carnage. Just as she began to walk forward, the man hanging by his arms, his skin swaying in the breeze, he spat blood onto the floor next to her shoes, lifted his head, and screamed. The next day, Kelly got out of her car and headed up the road to the Studdles' home. This time she was accompanied by the 2 officers that had helped her catch the man who had let his jealousy and rage destroy the lives of at least 2 men. They parked outside the house and started down the road. Just before she stepped onto the curb, a black fedora came tumbling by and stopped just a few feet away. She walked over, picked up the hat, and slowly placed it on her head. All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you very much for listening. For more from me, go to joesnotesblog.com. All voices and music for this episode performed by Joe Gray.
Where's your hat? 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 Where's your hat?
Fucking wind took it. Fucking wind took it. Fucking wind took it. The fucking wind took it. Yeah, that's it. God dang fucking wind took it. Fucking wind took it. That's right. Fucking wind took it. The fucking wind took it. Fucking wind took it. Gary worked. Gary worked. Gary fucking worked. Gary fucking worked.
You must be Kelly.
No.
You must be Kelly. You must be Kelly. You must be Kelly. Am I doing it like that? You must be Kelly. You must be Kelly. That seems odd. I'll have to look into it. I'm a pirate. That's right. Arr. You said yar.
Yes. You're hurting my hand, Mr. Studdles. She followed Gary more cautiously, as to not be found out, but she was practiced at such things, so blat, 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 blat.
What?
Gary arrived. Gary arrived at the garage. That's no. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness gracious. Are you guys still at the farmhouse I called in earlier? Are you guys still at the farmhouse I called in earlier? Yeah. Didn't see much, so we're going to leave. No. Serious. Yeah, the suspect jumped out the window up there. She responded. Let's go see what horror lies up there. The smell of putrefying, looking around the room. Ah! Ah! Ma! Ma! Ah! Ah! I don't know what he sounded like.